go back to this, if something suddenly occurs to someone and you think, I wish I'd asked, we're fine to ask as we go on.
Okay. So, dedicated parking facilities is just, I guess, a little bit of jargon for car parking buildings or off-street parking lots that are dedicated just for parking. They're not tied in with a shopping centre or a residential development. They are standalone. It's your tournaments, your Wilson parking and Auckland Council parking typically. So in the notified plan, the rules distinguish between long-term and short-term parking, and they were customised to the different zones around Auckland. Long-term parking is where you can park there all day, so it's essentially commuters. Short-term parking is more your shoppers, people visiting a destination but not staying all day. So there was an easier path typically if it was for short stay, supporting retail and so on, but a more difficult path if it was for permanent long-term parking, because of some of the issues that arise with these types of parking facilities. So it was a discretionary activity for short term in the city centre, the fringe around the city centre here, metropolitan centres, town centres, local centres and the mixed use zone. It was fully discretionary for short term. Discretionary resource consent required for long term in metropolitan town and local centres in the mixed use zone, but non-complying for long term parking in the city centre. Given the amount of existing long-term parking in the city centre and significant investment in public transport and the hub that the city centre is for public transport, and issues with congestion by allowing more and more all-day parking facilities in the city centre. Submitters' views were to make the status of long-term parking in the city centre and in the fringe area more permissive. So it's submitters there, and I assume that was Wilson and Tournament predominantly.
Well, some of the retailers as well, and some of the property interests within those centres. So they also felt that they should relax those particular rules around the non-accessory parking.
And Council's position, a bit of a shift, restricted discretionary instead of full discretionary for long-term and also for short-term in the metropolitan town, local centres in the mixed-use zone, but holding the line with non-complying for new permanent long-term parking facilities in the city centre. We had significant involvement from Auckland Transport in developing these parking provisions or dedicated parking facilities.
That's correct. So Auckland Transport also have a separate strategy which provides guidance around how and when they provide different forms of parking, including dedicated or non-accessory parking. So they're also looking at, as part of that strategy, park and ride facilities. So they're one of the reasons for relaxing the activity status for non-accessory parking in those particular centre zones. It demonstrates a greater alignment between Auckland Transport's strategic direction in terms of the opportunities to provide for non-accessory or dedicated parking with their own strategy. Some of the benefits include consolidation and rationalisation of parking into one building, for instance, in a centre, or two buildings, which helps manage the number of access points which are required when you compare that situation to providing on-site parking for individual sites and the need to manage multiple access points in that particular scenario. So in short, there was greater alignment between the direction that we've taken in terms of the changes in Auckland Transport's kind of wider strategic outcomes that they're seeking in terms of parking.
I suppose you can't look at these issues in isolation. The work that Auckland Transport is doing is actually trying to look at a much more comprehensive way. I mean, we know that there are a lot of suburban streets nearby that are being used as park and rides, and there's a very large piece of work that's being developed in and around trying to complement what you've just explained.
Councillor Webster?
Well, it's probably along the same lines, and Councillor Fletcher may have answered it. I just want to be sure that park and rides are being treated differently to allow quicker and more easily built park and rides rather than having to go through too much bureaucratic nonsense when we need them quickly.
Yes, the plan does provide specifically for park and ride. It is a restricted discretionary activity, so there's quite a limited set of considerations around that.
And would that,
Yep.
sorry, Madam Chair, can I explore that just a little bit further? Would that include temporary use of park and ride? I mean, I'll give you the example in Albany where I think it's Wilson's or somebody, they've taken a bit of unused land. They've obviously tar sealed it or put gravel down. They're charging $1 for 12 hours, which is fantastic.
I think, councillor, we're probably
So it's probably
straying a
going
little
into
bit away
So
from...
I just wanted to know that whether in the unitary plan, I was using it as an example, there was going to be an ability for people to do temporary or whatever to answer a need.
To answer that question, park and ride has quite a specific definition in the unitary plan.
Okay.
So it's tied to the rapid and frequent transport network. So in some cases, that situation won't qualify.
Okay, thanks.
I guess the answer you're hoping, though, is it doesn't exclude that being
Yeah.
able to be done.
Yeah.
Councillor Penrose.
Yeah, and thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, guys. This is, I think it's critical. I don't want to dive down into the detailed stuff, but it's critical for the fact being is that to AT, the PPP stuff is totally unknown to them. And I know that I've been talking with them some 7 or 8 weeks ago now, and they were totally oblivious to how it can actually gel and some work going on there. But at the same token, we can't wait forever. We've got to get on and build it.
Okay. Councillor Lee?
Yes, I'm not sure we've got it right yet. This is a very, very complex matter, not just technical, also relates to human behaviour. I know Auckland Transport have been working on this for a number of years now, and they started off on the basis of a citywide approach, dealing with streets that were built before the motor car was actually invented, in the same way as streets that were built because the motor car was invented, and it proved to be quite problematic. Have we taken advice from overseas on this matter? Because members raised all the different complexities.
yeah.
It is complex.
It is. Councillor, I'll get Mrs. Perrott to comment. Remember, this is just reminding us of the discussion and the background, so we can't deliberate or seek any further information at this stage, and we just need to be very cautious of that. So, okay. So I'm not too sure whether the question of did we seek information overseas is to be answered, John, but you might just like to make a comment.
I think, as we've always said, that this session is about telling you what was the council's position at the hearing. We do encourage you to go on to the Independent Hearings Panel website to see the evidence that the council did lodge, but also any other submitters' evidence lodged on the same topic. But I don't believe it's appropriate for us to start a conversation about the research.
I just asked a question, did we seek it, when we're talking about our evidence, did we have overseas advice as well or not? It's a simple question.
In terms of the evidence from council's point of view, there was quite an extensive survey of both operative district plans and some overseas examples in terms of how they had regulated around not only parking but other aspects of the transport rules as well. So there is a literature review, and it's quite comprehensive in the transport evidence.
All right.
Okay. Right, cycle parking. Now, some of the legacy district plans required off-street cycle parking, but it certainly wasn't common across the board. So with the unitary plan, we did propose minimum cycle parking and end-of-trip facilities, i.e. things like showers and lockers, for certain types of development. Larger office developments would have fallen into that category, and there was some guidance on the design and storage of bicycles. It was a restricted discretionary activity to infringe that and not provide any cycle parking at all or any showers or lockers. So it didn't hit every development, but at a certain size of development, and certainly office would be a key one, there was a requirement. Submitters, they sought a range of changes from retaining the controls, amending them or deleting them, adding extra requirements in terms of what might be provided to encourage or facilitate or assist those who are commuting to work, not via private motor vehicle. Council's position at the hearing essentially was to retain the approach, just a slightly more graduated, refined set of rules, and a bit more clarity of exactly what the end-of-trip facilities might entail, but no major change there. Still a requirement for cycle parking with medium to large-scale developments.
Oh, Mark?
Madam Chair, my question's about on-street parking in residential suburbs, and I just, if you could just remind me what the implications were for the rules that we were talking about previously for on-street parking in residential.
So the unitary plan does not control on-street parking, it only controls off-street parking, and so the implications are that a move away from fairly high minimums towards lower minimums or no minimums in centres will mean Auckland Transport Council needs to be very active in managing the on-street parking, as Auckland Transport already is. But over time, that's just a space that Auckland Transport needs to be working in.
And you're saying there are no unitary plan rules governing that?
On-street parking. So the unitary plan doesn't have P180 rules, it doesn't have resident-only parking rules.
No.
It all sits outside of the unitary plan.
Corridor width rules?
For new developments, for new subdivision, there are requirements for streets to be designed with on-street parking of certain widths and dimensions and so on for a new subdivision. Yeah.
Madam Chair, I don't know the specifics obviously, but obviously I'm just reflecting on Stonefields, and I suppose that the question would be the extent to which experiences we've had from Stonefields have fed into Council's position.
So something like a Stonefields would go through a planning process and a plan change, and or a big complex subdivision where the street dimensions and the design of the streets would be looked at that stage in terms of parking. So, yeah.
And mindful,
that's the space the unitary plan works.
And mindful of the implications for what would be the new
development.
Yeah, on-street the new parking rules.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
Right. So apologies, a little bit more jargon here, but trip generation thresholds. So this is a way of the unitary plan ensuring that for developments, particularly things like a pack and save that are clearly going to generate a lot of traffic, your Mitre 10s, your pack and saves, large office developments, and so on. It's a way of being able to assess the traffic impacts of those developments, and the unitary plan takes an approach as notified of having a trigger or a threshold outside of the city centre, metropolitan town centres and the terrace apartment building zone where council can, along with AT, Auckland Transport and NZTA, assess the traffic impacts of those developments. But the key point there is that this trip generation threshold, vehicle trip generation threshold or trigger, did not apply in the city centre, metropolitan and town centres or the terrace and apartment building zone. So it's essentially in the notified plan, it's a given that in those locations there will be developments that will generate significant volumes of traffic, and that's just simply anticipated, and there's a move away from having minimum requirements to hopefully encourage less on-street parking and in some cases, off-street parking, in some cases maximum parking rates. The submitter's view, some wanted to retain the rules, some wanted them deleted or exclude certain types of activities or uses, and some wanted certain activities or areas to be exempt completely from the rules. The council's approach was largely to retain the notified position, apart from just some refinement of the trigger or the threshold where a traffic assessment would be required, a catch-all for activities that weren't listed in a table that was in the notified plan, so that they would, at a certain trip level, have to come in for a traffic assessment, and there were some exclusions identified. But the overall approach of accepting that in the centres and the Tursney Park building zone, there wouldn't need to be a case-by-case assessment of whether there was too much traffic being generated or some traffic adverse effects was retained as part of the council's position. It's mainly for out-of-centre large traffic generating developments.